Call me Bill Cunningham, and let me start the way the truth always starts, with something small and stupid that snowballs into a night you'll never forget. I'm not 40 yet, but the clock's loud enough to rattle the dishes, and after I lost my warehouse job in a burst of temper I couldn't stuff back in my chest, I was left with overdue bills, 2 warm beers, and a pride that wasn't worth the rent. The ad was nothing. One crooked rectangle of ink in a back page classified stack, as old school as a church bake sale. Janitor wanted. No phone, no name, only an address and a time. Midnight. You ever seen a school interview at midnight? Me neither. But work is work when the power company is memorizing your last name. I pointed my rattling Chevy down I-35, angling south through the kind of Texas night that hangs like a blanket. Mesquite shadows, cicadas sawing the air, gaslight flirting with E. When the needle finally slid under the red like a dying fish, I rolled into a town I'd never heard of, Needle Ridge, Texas. The station looked stranded in the 70s. Sun-bleached awning, a hand-painted price sign tilting on a broken leg, a humming cooler whose door stuck like a bad memory. I was thumbing the cap off a stale coffee when I saw it. Not a big dog like in A Different Life, but a cat. Lord, what a cat. Broad-chested for a tom, fur like smoke scuffed by hard weather, and a set of scars cutting a diagonal from whisker pad to brow, as if a hawk's talons had tried to write its name across his face and missed by a miracle. One ear was notched. His eyes were green glass in the station's bug-choked light, patient, measuring. He stood in the middle of the 2-lane like he owned the deed to it, then padded closer, tail swaying like a metronome that knew something about time I didn't. I braced for a hiss. Instead, the cat gave me a solemn blink, the kind you only get from creatures that have made peace with ghosts, and bumped my boot with his head. I laughed because sometimes your soul trips over gratitude. "All right, Sheriff," I told him. "I'll get out of your town in a minute." The cat stared another heartbeat, turned and trotted into the dark like a man who keeps his appointments. The school waited at the edge of Needle Ridge, hunkered on a low, thorny rise. Against the sky, it was a black geometry. Long brick block, blank rows of windows, a chain-link fence slack as a tired belt. Texas schools all look a little the same from the highway, flags and football, but this one had let go. The sign out front held on with 2 screws in habit. A few bulbs in the marquee sputtered John to slide over pavement crazed with dry season cracks. I parked by the steps. The air smelled like sun-baked dust still radiating from stone. Inside, the front doors groaned and a hallway yawned in both directions under fluorescent lights that couldn't hold their ground. Flicker, fade, pop, survive. Trophy cases sweated on the inside. Bronze had tarnished to something like tired fruit. Class photos were bleached to ghosts. My boot heels were too loud. The front office looked staged for a wake. Empty chair, barely pulled back, a desk with no owner, and a single sheet of paper in the center like a lily on still water. "Hi, Bill. You've got the job. Congratulations." Under it, hammered in thick black marker, "All 6 rooms must be cleaned tonight, no matter what. If you do not clean them, you will die." Somebody's idea funny? Maybe. But I'm a man with rituals. An old coin in my wallet I rub when the road goes narrow. A habit of tapping wood, crossing myself in a half motion I picked up from a grandmother who told trouble where to sit. I folded the note and pocketed it. My palms went damp. I knocked twice on the desk, stupid, stubborn, and whispered, "Let's not make this worse," to nobody. The overhead light buzzed like a horsefly. No giggling teenagers with a phone camera, no principal waiting to yell "gotcha." Just the hum of a building that hadn't slept right in years. So I did what you do when a dare dresses up like a paycheck. I stepped back into the hall and started walking towards whatever midnight had planned.
You can tell a lot about a place from its corners. Needle Ridge Elementary, at least that's what the ruined letters tried to spell, had those weird school corners that funnel noise and drafts, and the air down there carried a smell like old paper and mop water that forgot how to be clean. I wandered, 'cause you do, reading the taped labels on doors, art, cafeteria, gym, and rattling the ones sealed with chain. That's when I saw the arrows, thick streaks of red paint, hand-drawn, glossy, like they hadn't dried all the way. Not official arrows. They pointed me off the main corridor and down a side hall toward a back stairwell where the light went bad. Superstitions walked with me. Step over this crack, bump the case glass with a knuckle, count to 3 before the knob turns. The stair treads were metal and sang underfoot. The basement door looked like the mouth of a story. Someone had scotch-taped a hand-lettered sign to it, Janitor's Room. Inside, the lockers weren't the rotted kind from movie sets. They were the everyday dented steel of people who come and go. One stood half open, a frayed scarf hanging like a captured flag. Another had a child's backpack with a laminated name tag that had curled. I was halfway past when I saw my name. Bill was scrawled across a door in black marker. Clipped below it, a laminated ID with my picture, the kind of grainy copier shot that catches you blinking. I tried on a laugh and got the sound a saw makes when it hits a nail. The locker creaked open. A uniform lay inside, folded crisp like it had been ironed by someone who loved order. Charcoal coveralls, the kind you can bleed in and they'll forgive you. A new badge, Bill, in block letters. I hesitated, then slipped into it. The sleeves were right, the waist knew me, and when the zipper climbed, I felt like I'd been shaken into a roll and told to hit my mark. The hallway outside had picked up a draft that smelled like old auditorium curtains. There hadn't been a cart behind me when I came down, but now there was one parked by the stairwell. Gray, industrial, with its buckets nested and mops resting like tired herons. A roll of black trash bags hung from a hook with the patient promise of all the garbage a day produces. I put my hands on the handle. Metal. Cool. When I pushed, the wheel squeaked that particular school squeak, answering down the tunnel and coming back twice as lonely. The ramp to the first landing rose longer than it should have. Either the architects hated janitors or the building had decided to tilt away from me. Sweat pricked behind my ears. And then I heard it. Music. Thin as sunlight through blinds. Not radio. Older. Full of softened brass and a piano played by a gentleman who knew his proportions. It had the fragile wobble of a record that survived garage summers. I followed it like a trail of breath to a door with a stamped metal plate. Room 1. The handle was cold. The hinges cried when I pulled. The sound hit first. Violins lifting like a flock. A slow dance number as civil as a promise. Then the sight. The classroom wasn't a classroom. The room had swollen into a ballroom dressed in plaster and chandeliers, the kind of shine you get in dreams where money and dust can both afford the same address. A dance floor polished so clean my reflection looked like it wanted to negotiate. And people, dozens, moving in pairs, the men in tailcoats and slicked hair, the women in gloves and gowns that whispered money and a century ago. Their faces were bleached to color, photo negatives that had stepped off the page. None of them looked at me. The door clicked shut behind my back. I turned the knob and got a Locke's version of no. I swallowed. Evening, I tried. The music stopped like a lid slamming on a pot. Every dancer turned to me in the same click. eyes like sharpened glass, and raised a finger to their lips. Shh. I nodded, because sometimes you agree with ghosts to live. I slid the broom from the cart. The bristles whispered across the floor in a circle along the wall, while 100 eyes watched me like jurors waiting on a twitch. When the floor I'd touched shone a fraction brighter, a single violin found the note again, then another, and the orchestra swelled back from the dark like a city's lights were turning after an outage. The dancers reanimated, turned away as one, and resumed their slow orbit. The door opened when I tried it the second time. I backed out, breath hitching, and the music followed me a step before the hallway swallowed.
Behind room 2 waited a box that shouldn't have existed, no deeper than 2 feet, carved into the concrete like a dollhouse cavity, lit by a lamp the size of a cigarette ember. Inside was a home, not a toy, a home. Tiny green walls painted with the stubborn care of a mother, a rug no bigger than my palm, teacups made from thimble halves. A staircase climbed to a second floor where I heard a teenager's laugh in a voice like pencil scritch. I leaned in until my reflection blurred in the little window glass, and that's when I saw the sign nailed over the door in letters so small I had to squint. The Nibblers. It should have been funny. It wasn't. The father sat in a chair with a folded newspaper cut from the classifieds of some human paper, frowning like men do when the world insists on doing what it wants. The mother bustled by a stove with a rag for an apron. The giggles upstairs turned into a sing-song conversation with nobody I could see, and in the middle of their tiny dining table lay a skeleton, too big for a rat, too strange for a possum, bones bleached to museum white, jaw open in a polite O like it had been surprised to death. We do this, I told nobody, because the note says we do, and dipped a rag in the bucket. I wiped the exterior of their house with more care than I've given to most decisions, rounding the windows, buffing the brass knob no bigger than a pea, cleaning the ridge where their porch met negative space. The father mouse lowered his paper, looked me in the eye, and raised one pink hand in a wave. I froze so hard my bones creaked, then nodded like a man answering a judge. Upstairs, the teen voice squealed, "Dad!" in a pitch that was all corners. The lamp flickered. Somewhere behind the walls I heard the tiny thud of feet and the rustle of a secret family rearranging themselves to be seen by no one. Texas has its own flavors of weird. Roadside shrines, brush country mysteries, the way oil fields looked like dinosaur skeletons pumping the dark. But this was another species entirely. A city in a box, a life you could crush with an elbow slip. I finished my wiping and backed away slow, setting the rag down like it might explode. The door eased shut with a click a courthouse would admire. Out in the hallway, the air felt wrong in my throat, as if I'd swallowed a penny. I walked, counting arrows that weren't there anymore, checking the ceiling tiles for the kind of mildew shapes that looked like faces. I keep saying, you notice small things, and I mean it. I also mean this. Something had been taking inventory of me since I entered. My weight on a stair, my breath in the cold pockets, the cadence of my boots, the pattern of my superstition. The note in my pocket was a coal, hot on skin, a rule I couldn't afford to learn the hard way. Somewhere behind me I heard a soft sound, pads, not claws, and turned. The cat from the gas station watched me from the far end of the hall, tail tucked neatly around his feet, head slightly tilted like a math teacher waiting for a student to catch up. His scars looked older in the fluorescent bruise of light. "Sheriff," I said, and the word felt right. He blinked slowly, stood and walked past a T intersection without looking at me,
vanishing into a shadow so thin it shouldn't have held a creature that size. When you've been blessed like that, you don't ask for more. You cash it and keep moving. Room 2 stayed closed behind me, holding its lamp and its family together by the force of its own miniature gravity. I pushed the cart, and deeper into Needle Ridge's belly we went.
If you want to break a man, don't scream in his face. Lull him. Room 3 was a classroom of the ordinary kind, the kind that makes your neck loosen by reflex. Bolted desks, chalk dust, a globe with Texas worn smooth by little hands tracing the panhandle. I swept, I mopped, I emptied a bin full of worksheets practicing long division and the strange spells of state capitals. I stood in the door after and listened for the music or the whisper or the click of something that wanted to make a point. Nothing. The hallway held its breath like a swimmer. Room 4 repeated the trick. Alphabet freeze, peeling at Q. Reading posters sunstruck into monochrome. The countertop sink dripping once every 19 seconds like a sleepy metronome. I wiped the board till my sleeve gritted chalk, scrubbed a coffee ring off a teacher's desk, and straightened a neat little altar of abandoned erasers. Awaited again. Still nothing. It was worse than ghosts. The first 2 rooms had been carnival tricks from a town that had pawned its cross. Rooms 3 and 4 were the lie that makes you whisper, maybe it's over. I rolled the cart back into the hall. The wheels squealed once and then obeyed, and somewhere under the whir, I thought I heard a whisper of movement, like paper sliding across a desk 6 corridors away. I told myself it was the building settling. I told myself lots of things. That's when the cat reappeared, halfway down the hall, poised in a puddle of light, looking back at me like a foreman checking a new hire's pace. He didn't come closer. He didn't leave. He watched until I pushed past an intersection, then paced me in a parallel hallway, graceful as a rumor. I passed a blown-out trophy case. The plaques inside had names I didn't recognize. A. Castaneda, M. Ludlow, S. Navarro, and years that ended before the century turned. I tapped the glass. Once. Twice. Old habit. Wake the dead gently. Ask permission to pass. The cat's reflection in the glass looked like 2 eyes painted where no eyes should be. The air down here remembered storms. I could taste thunder and how the fluorescents hummed, and how the AC tubes coughed stale wind. The note in my pocket pressed its sentence into my thigh. All 6 rooms must be cleaned tonight, no matter what. If you do not clean them, you will die. I thought about who had written it. The marker strokes were angry, sure, but each letter leaned exactly the same way, as if the hand that wrote them had experience giving orders. I thought about who had put my name on a locker and a uniform cut to my waist. I thought about the smell that had begun to leak into the hall, metallic, sweet, an iron coin under the tongue. If rooms 3 and 4 had been lullabies, the song was over. A distant rhythm started up ahead, a steady punctuation that shook the dust in the ceiling like the drum of a long walk. My palms forgot what drive felt like. I pushed the cart toward room 5, and the cat didn't follow. He sat down, wrapped his tail across his toes like a monk, and looked away. That's how you know something cares about you. It refuses to watch what you're about.
The handle to room 5 was sticky.
When my fingers came away, they wore a shine that no janitor's solvent should have to meet. The door swung on a hinge that squealed like a pig, and sound leapt at me. Chop, chop, chop. Each blow arriving like a sheriff's knuckles on a midnight door. The classroom had been replaced by a butcher's theater. Chains hung from the rafters, each ending in a jay of metal that swayed under its burden. Meat. Enough of it to stock a fairground, to fill a smokehouse, to feed whatever thing this room thought it had to feed. Some cuts you could tell yourself were steer or hog if you were generous with the art of lying. Some were shapes your brain recognized in its oldest corners but begged you to misname. The floor was tile under a gloss of fat, the smell of hot coin blooming into pennies in my mouth. At the back of the room stood the worker whose hours never ended. He was taller than a man by a foot and wider by a county. His apron had gone beyond stain to a kind of archaeology. Curled from his skull were two ridged horns, not delicate like a goat's or silly like a costume, but heavy, geological, the kind of horns that taught fences to respect them. Texas breeds horns like churches breed hymns. These were cousins to the longhorns you see royal under high school mascots, but wrong in a way I felt where a prayer should be. The cleaver in his hand was the size of a road sign, and he lifted it like it was a rolled-up newspaper and justice owed the countertop. Chop! The sound vibrated my teeth. The door clicked shut behind me. I flinched, turned, tested it. Locked. Of course. "All right," I said to the room, my voice floating like a cheap balloon. "We clean." The broom's bristles found grit, bone fleck, stringy ribbons as something that used to be attached to something else. I worked the edges first, the wise man's route, back to the wall, eyes on the floor. The mop smeared and then surrendered. I changed water twice. The bucket sloshed pink and then honest red. Somewhere in the dance of sweep, scrape, ring, the chopping stopped. The quiet that followed had shape. I lifted my head. The butcher, stockman, whatever legend this county gave him, had paused. The cleaver leaned against his shoulder. When our eyes met, heat crawled up my neck. He smiled. It wasn't friendly, it was an acknowledgement, the kind a storm makes when it chooses a cotton field. His lips peeled back and he let a sentence tumble out. Gravel dragged across a tin roof. "Tastes good." I didn't answer, because I couldn't. My hands resumed on their own. The broom drew circles, the mop drew lines. I don't know how long I worked like that. Minutes that stretched like hot tar. The chains kept a slow perimeter sway. The room's temperature rose the way nightmares do, 1 degree at a time until your skin knows it's cooking. At some point, a shadow moved across my boot, and I flinched like I'd been shot. The cat had slipped in. He padded along the perimeter, tail low, gaze locked on the stockman, and then sat by the door with his chin tipped like a magistrate preparing to speak. The butcher didn't look at him. He lifted the blade again, and the chop came back, a metronome permitting me to live. When the floor was as clean as an evil room can be, I stowed the mop, wiped my hands down my thighs, and put my palm to the handle. It resisted, then obeyed. I didn't run. I closed it gently, the way you do with a sleeping child, and told the corridor, "Thank you," with a breath I hadn't known I'd been saving.
Room 6 wore ordinary like a disguise. A Texas classroom again. Solar system poster puffed in the middle from heat. Chalkboard with math tattooed across it like a riddle that had given up. I blinked and the room folded itself the way a stage folds between scenes, and suddenly I was home. Not the place I pay rent home, the one they tear down in your 30s because the land's worth more than your memories. The linoleum with the faded sunflower pattern, the dent in the oak table left by a cast iron pot, the lemon magnet guarding a refrigerator older than my first lie. The air smelled like Sunday, and there she was, my mother. Not the ghost from the end of a hallway or a hammered thin face in an old Polaroid. Her, in full color. Her hands folded like she had a prayer in them and didn't want to spill it. The hair pinned in the way she wore when company came. The dress she saved for the Lord in good gossip. "Billy," she said, soft as a door opening. "You're late. Sit. Eat." I could lie to you and say I held steady. I didn't. The note in my pocket turned cold enough to make snow. The table was set. Plates, steam rising from a casserole that smelled like chicken and thyme, a wedge of bread where a knife waited like a marker in a book. I sat because I didn't know how not to. My hands behaved like a son's. We talked like people who have perfected that cowboy skill of circling the truth until it tires out. Weather, the drive, the job. She nodded when I said janitor, and pride watered her eyes like she'd been praying for something modest enough to bless. "Stay with me," she whispered. And if you've never had a dead woman tell you that, believe me, the room leans. Here is the part where I change the names, because the dead deserve it and the living require it. The papers had called her the Stockpot Widow. Texas prefers its monsters dressed in folksy, and she earned it if earning is the word for a ledger that fills with other people's last suppers. Chicken soup, always. Warm, sweet, easy on a throat. Her pattern was a porch light that never learned mercy. I was 14 the night I added the math wrong and still got the right answer. Sheriff Navarro was the only man who'd look down at a scrawny kid and listen. He went to the basement I wasn't allowed to enter and came back with a face that had learned something it couldn't forget. Years later, a clock in a white room watched my mother die, and I watched it with her. We all breathed easier after. Tonight, we were rehearsing a play that should have stayed struck. She opened her arms. I stood because grief is muscle memory. The cat was not in the kitchen, but the idea of him perched somewhere just beyond the curtain anchored me. My right hand found the box cutter clipped under the cart's lip. The little blade flicked out with a note that rang like flatware. I stepped in, close enough to count the constellations in the brown of her eyes. "Hug me, Billy," she said. I did, and I slid the blade into her chest, where in a different life a son puts his cheek. She went quiet. She went heavy. I held her like you hold the thing you loved before you understood it, and eased her back into the chair. Her head nodded forward and rested in a bowl as if the motion had been rehearsed. The kitchen listened. Then I did what the note commanded because you have to. I cleaned. Soap, circles, breath counting. I stacked plates, wiped crumbs into my palm, shook them into a bag. I straightened the lemon magnet because its angle had offended me for 15 years. When there was nothing left to make right, the door unlatched as naturally as a breath. I stepped out, the last word of a prayer evaporating on my tongue. The hallway had reset to school smell and hum. My hands shook. They kept moving.
The basement locker room was exactly as I'd left it, which is the creepiest thing a room can be after you've been to church and hell in the space of 40 minutes. The dented soccer ball didn't remember me. The scarf still hung like a story with its ending ripped off. On the bench, square as a yes, lay $500 in cash.
5s and 20s stacked with the tidy arrogance of money that knows it's done its job. No note, no wink, just payment, as if some payroll office under the Guadalupe River had processed my forms. I thumbed the edges, heavy, clean. I slid the stack into the pocket on my thigh where the warning lived like a coal cooling into carbon. I hung the coveralls back in Bill's locker and clipped the badge to its lip as if it had always belonged there. When the door closed, the latch gave a little click, the sound of a deal you didn't sign but honored anyway. The cat met me at the top of the stairs. He wound once around my ankles, leaving a ghost thread of warmth and dust on denim, then padded ahead, not looking back, leading me the way a foreman leads a man to the gate on his first day's end. Outside, the horizon carried a bruise of pale. Texas dawn limbers slowly and then arrives all at once, like a big man standing up. The Chevy turned over on the second prayer. Gravel popped under my tires. I looked in the rear view by a habit I don't intend to break, and the school squatted on its hill like a courthouse that had learned too much. Here is the part where the skeptic in you puts on his glasses. Ballroom? Mouse house? A horned stockman in a slaughter room? Your head does that little tilt because you're protecting yourself from belief. I'd do it too if I hadn't swept that floor. But listen, I am a janitor now. That title isn't about mops or buckets. It's about seeing what's been spilt and doing the quiet, unglamorous work of making a place survivable. Someone has to empty the bins in the rooms where the dead rehearse their alibis. Someone has to tell a floor it can shine again, even if it's an evil floor. Someone has to know when to hold a blade steady and when to fold a napkin into a precise square. My mother died a long time ago, and then again tonight. Sheriff Navarra told me once in a parking lot behind the courthouse that Closure is a tourist town. Pretty lights, good pie, no one really lives there. He was right. I don't want closure. I want a job that quiets the noise long enough to pay the bills and teach my hands how to be useful. If the school calls me back, and I think it will because all 6 rooms must be cleaned tonight, sounds like a contract that renews itself, I'll go. The pay is cash, the hours don't talk too much, and there's a cat who seems to have made me part of his beat. Will I burn the place down? You could. People love a solution that satisfies the caveman in the heart. But I'm not a firefighter. I'm a man with a cart. If tomorrow night opens room 1 to a waltz and room 5 to a cleaver, I'll sweep. If room 6 tries a new cast for the same old kitchen, I'll do what has to be done, and then I'll clean. And if my mother shows up again, if the Stockpot Widow wants one more hug, I'll oblige her like a good son, and I'll make sure she stays dead long enough to let the sun rise. I pulled onto the road. Needle Ridge peeled away behind me, the cat nowhere and everywhere, the sky bruising lighter. People think courage is loud. It isn't. Courage is a man in coveralls counting his breaths, tapping the dashboard twice, and saying,